Porsche did not have a rough year. It had the kind of year that makes an entire industry stop pretending everything is fine. In 2025, operating profit did not slide, soften, or miss expectations by a little. It collapsed by 98%, from more than 5 billion euros to roughly 90 million. In China, the market that once carried Porsche's global growth story, the brand sold fewer cars than it sold in Germany, its own home market. For Porsche, that is not just a bad statistic, that is a historical alarm bell, because China was not a side project. China was the foundation under the whole future plan, and that plan had a name, the Taycan. Porsche's first fully electric car was not supposed to be just another expensive sedan with a battery under the floor. It was supposed to prove that the most profitable sports car company on earth could carry its badge, its engineering, and its prestige into the electric age without losing control. By 2030, Porsche said 80% of its sales would be fully electric. The Macan, the Cayenne, the Panamera, almost everything would move toward the plug. Only the 911 would remain protected, like a museum piece with a pulse. But now the electric dream is being cut back. The profit has almost disappeared. China has turned cold. Dealers are discounting cars Porsche customers once waited months to buy, and the one model quietly keeping the company alive is not the futuristic one. It is the loud, gasoline-burning machine Porsche spent years treating like the past. To understand why this is so shocking, you have to remember what Porsche used to represent. This was not a normal car company. For decades, Porsche was the brand other automakers studied with a mix of admiration and jealousy. It sold fewer vehicles than giants like Toyota, Volkswagen, or Ford, but it made extraordinary money on the vehicles it did sell. In strong years, Porsche's operating margin sat near 18%, in an industry where 8% can already look healthy. A Cayenne could produce the kind of profit that other companies needed a whole row of economy cars to match. This was the magic of Porsche. Low volume, high desire, high pricing, and customers who believed the badge was worth the premium. In 2022, Porsche went public after being split out from Volkswagen, and for a brief moment, it was valued higher than the parent company that still controlled most of it. The child was worth more than the parent. That tells you everything about how powerful the brand had become. Porsche had survived world wars, oil crises, recessions, and the near-bankruptcy scare of the early 1990s. While names like Saab, Pontiac, and Hummer disappeared from the road or were reduced to memories, Porsche kept returning stronger. If there was one automaker people assumed could not fall into a strategic trap, it was Porsche. The brand looked too disciplined, too profitable, too protected by history. So when Porsche made its biggest bet in modern history, the industry did not laugh, it listened. Around 2019 and 2020, Porsche looked at the future and decided the next chapter would be electric. The Taycan arrived as a statement car, not a cautious experiment. It was Porsche telling the world that Tesla did not get to own performance EVs forever. Porsche could bring better build quality, sharper handling, real luxury, and a crest on the hood that no startup could manufacture overnight. This was the promise. Tesla could have the hype, but Porsche would have the execution. The company then pushed the message even harder. In 2021, Porsche's CEO announced that by 2030, 80% of sales would be fully electric. That was not a vague aspiration buried in a sustainability document. That was the strategic centerpiece. The electric Macan would replace the gas version. The Cayenne and Panamera would follow the same direction. The 718 sports car would become electric. Porsche poured billions into factories, platforms, software, and battery plans. It tied part of its future to Northvolt, the Swedish battery company that was supposed to help supply cells for the coming electric lineup. Everything about the plan sounded precise, confident, and very Porsche. It was not trying to join the EV transition late. It was trying to define what the premium version of that transition looked like. And for a while, the bet looked brilliant. The Taycan won awards. Reviewers praised the way it drove. In 2023, Porsche sold around 40,000 Taycans globally, a strong number for a luxury electric sedan starting above $90,000. Analysts called it the thinking person's Tesla, which was exactly the kind of compliment Porsche wanted. The car seemed to answer the question every legacy luxury brand was struggling with. Could an old-world performance company build an electric car that did not feel like a compromise? For a moment, the answer looked like yes. The reservation lists looked healthy. The headlines were flattering. Investors could imagine Porsche emerging from the EV transition not as a victim, but as the legacy brand that had figured it out first. The strategy seemed almost perfectly balanced. Porsche had the heritage, it had the engineering, it had the margins, it had the customers. But then the numbers stopped climbing, and the first crack opened in the one place Porsche could least afford to lose: China. By 2021, China had become Porsche's single largest market, More than 30% of all Porsche sales went there, nearly 96,000 cars in 1 year. Young, wealthy Chinese buyers loved German luxury, and Porsche sat near the top of the status ladder. China was not just another region on a sales chart. It was the engine behind the global growth story and the place where Porsche's electric future was supposed to scale. Then, almost suddenly, the buyers started walking away. Not because China stopped buying cars. That is the important part. Chinese consumers were still buying electric vehicles in huge numbers. They were just not choosing Porsche the way they used to. The meaning of luxury had changed under Porsche's feet. Local Chinese brands like BYD, NIO, and Xiaomi were building electric cars that felt more advanced to the customers Porsche needed to win. They had better software experiences, bigger screens, faster innovation cycles, stronger connected features, and far lower prices. The most embarrassing example came from Xiaomi, a company most of the world still thought of as a phone maker. Its first car, the SU7, did not just arrive with excitement, it challenged the Taycan directly. It outsold it, out-teched it, and on a Shanghai track, even outlapped it. Think about what that means. A phone company, on its first serious attempt at building a car, beat Porsche at the game Porsche had chosen as its future. For a century, Porsche's business model depended on the idea that history mattered, racing heritage mattered, engineering tradition mattered. The story behind the machine mattered, but the average Chinese EV buyer is around 36 years old, and many of those buyers were not sitting in showrooms dreaming about Le Mans victories from another era. They saw a car as a smartphone on wheels. They judged it by software, screen quality, charging, driver assistance, and value. Put a Taycan beside a Xiaomi SU7 and the Porsche badge still meant something, but not enough. Not when the Chinese car felt more digital, more current, and dramatically cheaper. Porsche spent generations building a brand premium around sound, heritage, handling, and emotion. Then a new generation of buyers started valuing the interface more than the legend. That is a brutal shift, because it attacks the very thing Porsche sells. The numbers show how fast the shift became real. In 2024, Porsche's China sales fell sharply. In 2025, they fell again, ending the year down more than 26%. In the first half of 2026, the drop became even worse, down 32% to roughly 14,500 cars. For the first time in memory, Porsche sold fewer cars in China than in Germany. The market that was supposed to support the electric future had become the biggest hole in the plan, and while China was cracking, the Taycan itself was losing the aura Porsche had built around it. Reliability concerns began damaging the story. Consumer Reports named it among the least reliable vehicles of its year. Owners described warning lights, system failures, recalls, and frustrating service experiences, but reliability was only one part of the damage. The deeper problem was that the Taycan no longer looked competitive on the numbers EV buyers cared about most. A base Taycan cost close to $90,000 and offered a few hundred kilometers of range, while cheaper rivals went farther, charged faster, or delivered more tech for less money. A Tesla could offer more range at a lower price. Chinese EVs could offer more screens, more software, more features, and often more perceived innovation for half the money. Porsche had built a brilliant driving machine for a market increasingly obsessed with a different scoreboard. So Porsche did something it almost never had to do in its modern golden age. It discounted hard. Dealers started cutting tens of thousands off Taycans just to move inventory. On paper, discounts are a sales tool. In luxury, they are a warning siren. The entire point of a Porsche is that it should not feel like something being cleared out. A Porsche is supposed to be waited for, saved for, and protected by scarcity. When huge discounts appear, the buyer hears a different message. The car was overpriced. The market rejected it. The person who paid full price made a mistake. That kind of damage spreads quickly because premium vehicles rely on trust. Buyers expect the badge to protect value. When it does not, the badge starts working against itself. This is where the Taycan story begins to resemble other premium vehicle collapses, because once the resale values soften, confidence falls with them. People who paid $100,000 watch their cars lose value like old consumer electronics. Used Taycans weakened across the board, and analysts warned that if Porsche eventually kills the Taycan name, values could fall another 10% to 15% almost overnight. That is the opposite of what Porsche ownership is supposed to feel like. The badge was meant to say durability, desirability, and long-term value. Instead, the Taycan started to feel like a luxury gadget from the wrong product cycle, and nothing scares the next buyer faster than watching the last buyer lose money. The sales collapse was severe. Around 40,000 Taycans were sold in 2023. By 2025, that number had fallen to about 16,300. In the first half of 2026, global Taycan sales dropped another 25% to barely 6,000 units. Some dealers in China were reportedly moving only 1 or 2 Taycans a month. This was the car Porsche had positioned as the face of its future, and in some markets it was selling like a forgotten niche model. Porsche is now weighing whether the Taycan should be folded into the Panamera family, which would quietly remove the name that was supposed to define the electric era. The flagship of the revolution may not even survive long enough to become a second-generation icon. Then the supply chain story turned from difficult to disastrous. Northvolt, the Swedish battery company Porsche had expected to play a role in its electric roadmap, went bankrupt in late 2024. Just like that, one of the pillars under the future plan disappeared. The electric 7/8 sports car was pushed back by years. Porsche shut down its own battery operation, laid off workers, and wrote off hundreds of millions in investments that were no longer going to produce the future once promised. The electric Macan, another key part of the transition, arrived a year late because of software problems and cost much more than the gas model it was supposed to replace. The issues were no longer isolated. China was falling, the Taycan was weakening, battery plans were breaking, software delays were slowing launches, and then the financial statements revealed how large the bill had become. In 2025, Porsche's operating profit collapsed from more than 5 billion euros to about 90 million after nearly 5 billion euros in write-downs tied to the abandoned or delayed EV strategy. The most profitable automaker per vehicle nearly stopped making profit at all because the future it paid for arrived in the wrong shape, at the wrong speed, and with the wrong margins. Porsche tried to patch the hole. It discounted the Taycan. It leaned harder on hybrids. It rushed more value-oriented offerings into China to slow the collapse. It kept gas models alive longer than the old plan suggested, but none of it changed the direction fast enough, so the retreat became impossible to hide. Porsche abandoned the 80% electric by 2030 target, the goal that had defined the entire strategy. There was no triumphant replacement target, no confident new deadline, just a softer promise to keep selling gas, hybrid, and electric models for years to come. The combustion 718 ended production in late 2025. The gas Macan is being stopped this July. The company is cutting around 3,900 jobs. It shut down about 200 DC fast chargers it had built in China at enormous expense. It is slashing its Chinese dealer network from around 150 locations to about 80. That is not a minor adjustment. That is a company pulling back from a future it once described as inevitable. Leadership changed too. Porsche removed its chief financial officer and its sales chief. A new CEO was brought in to steady the company and present a reset. In a leaked letter to tens of thousands of German employees, the message became even clearer. Sales in China had hit historic lows. EV margins were much lower than gas margins. American tariffs were adding pressure because every Porsche sold in the United States is imported from Europe. And then came the line that captured the whole crisis. The old business model no longer works in a post-Trump, new China world. That is an extraordinary admission from a company that once looked almost immune to industry chaos. So this is the picture in 2026. China is shrinking. The Taycan is fading. Profit has almost vanished. Workers are being cut. The EV goal has been abandoned. The dealer network is contracting. The battery plan broke. The software plan stumbled. And yet one model is still growing. The twist is that it is not the model Porsche presented as the future. It is the 911. The gas-powered rear-engine sports car with 70 years of mythology behind it. The car Porsche kept as the protected exception. The car that was supposed to be the last flame of the old world, while everything else marched into the electric era. In the United States, 911 sales are up around 56% this year, helped by buyers who wanted the discontinued 718 Cayman and Boxster and simply moved up. Globally, 911 deliveries rose nearly 20%, while much of the rest of the lineup declined, with some models falling by a third or more. Every major Porsche story right now is about pressure, retreat, or decline. The 911 is the one that is still moving in the other direction, and that matters because the 911 is not just another model. It is a high-margin machine. Porsche makes serious money on it. So the car that strategy decks treated as the exception is now doing two jobs at once. It is supporting volume, and it is supporting profit. The electric cars that were supposed to carry Porsche into the future are sitting on lots, losing money, or forcing write-downs. The old sports car is doing the rescue work. If the 911 were falling like the Taycan, this would not be a story about a painful reset. It would be a story about survival. That is the irony at the center of the collapse. Porsche bet its future on electric, but the thing preventing the story from turning truly catastrophic is the gasoline sports car it could never quite bring itself to kill. The past is subsidizing the failed future. Now, to be fair, Porsche is not finished. That needs to be said clearly, because the internet loves turning every crisis into an obituary. Porsche still has cars people want. The Cayenne remains important. The 911 remains incredibly strong. The brand still has pricing power in the places where customers are buying the right models. It has a new CEO and a turnaround plan expected at its Capital Markets Day in October. The obvious strategy is to build fewer cars, charge more for them, protect the badge, and stop pretending the entire lineup can be forced electric on a timeline customers never accepted. The man now steering the company helped build the Cayenne and Macan programs that helped pull Porsche away from crisis in the early 2000s. He understands reinvention. If any brand can engineer its way back from a strategic mistake, Porsche belongs near the top of the list. But the bull case still has to answer one uncomfortable question. How long can the 911 carry the weight? There are only so many buyers moving up from the 718. That boost will fade. The 911 is powerful, profitable, and iconic, but it is not a full electric transition strategy. Meanwhile, the cars meant to define Porsche's future are exactly the ones with weaker margins, weaker demand, and stronger competition. China is not waiting for Porsche to catch up. Chinese brands are improving quickly, cutting prices aggressively, and treating software as the center of the car. Tesla is still fighting on scale and efficiency. Tariffs are not something Porsche can wish away. Battery supply, software, and regulations still matter. Porsche is trapped between two hard choices. If it leans back into gas and hybrids to protect profit, it risks falling further behind the electric and digital technology that global markets are still moving toward over time. If it doubles down on electric too quickly, it risks burning more money in a segment where a phone company has already embarrassed it. There is no comfortable exit. That is why this story is bigger than Porsche. Porsche was supposed to be the proof that a legacy luxury brand could win the electric transition on its own terms. It had the money, the engineering, the history, the margins, and the customers. Mercedes watched, BMW watched, Audi watched. Every premium automaker could look at Porsche and say, if anyone can do it, they can. Instead, Porsche has become the warning. If the most profitable, prestigious, disciplined car company in the world can misread the timing, the customer, and the technology curve, then nobody gets to feel safe. Ford pulled back when the electric pickup math stopped working. Tesla turned the Cybertruck into a symbol of hype, colliding with reality. And Porsche, the untouchable one, is being carried by the exact machine it treated as the last piece of the old era. The lesson is not that electric cars are doomed. That is too simple. Electric is still part of the future. The lesson is that betting the entire house on exactly when, how, and where that future arrives can destroy even the strongest plan. Porsche did not fail because it forgot how to build cars. That is what makes this so chilling. The Taycan is still, by many accounts, a brilliant car to drive. The engineering talent was real. The build quality was real. The ambition was real. What Porsche misread was more dangerous than engineering. It misread desire. Chinese buyers wanted screens, software, speed of innovation, and value. American buyers wanted incentives, stable pricing, and protection from tariffs. Many six-figure Porsche buyers still wanted emotion, sound, heritage, and resale strength. Porsche answered a question the market was not asking loudly enough, and it spent billions discovering the gap. For 100 years, the winners in the car business were the companies with the best engineering and the strongest brands. Porsche had both, and it still got blindsided by changing customers, shifting politics, collapsing suppliers, and a phone company that understood the new luxury language faster. Porsche will probably survive. It has the 911, the Cayenne, and a century of reinvention behind it. But it will not come out of this unchanged. It will come out smaller, more cautious, and far less certain that the badge alone can bend the market. The end of this era is not the death of Porsche. It is the death of Porsche's assumption that it could define the future simply by announcing it. The untouchable brand just proved that nobody is untouchable. And if you are one of its rivals watching this unfold, that is not comforting. That is the scariest warning in the entire car industry. So where do you land on it? Is Porsche about to claw its way back with the 911, the Cayenne, hybrids, and a slower electric plan? Or is this the first chapter of a much bigger reckoning for every luxury brand that bet the house on electric before customers were ready to follow? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want the next breakdown when Porsche reveals its turnaround plan this fall, hit subscribe, because that plan may decide whether this was just a brutal correction or the beginning of a completely different Porsche.